Our host is today is Florinda Boschetti, head of City Club at the EIT Urban Mobility. Hello, Florinda. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Veronica. I hope you can all hear me well. We do apologize for the little delay. We had some technical issues as always. I'm not mastering yet well this technology, so thank you for bearing with me. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a little bit past 5 o'clock in Brussels. It's 9:04 in London. I see this for Caroline and for those who are joining us from the UK. So my name is Florinda Boschetti. I'm the head of City Club, which is the community of local governments which are engaging in the EIT Urban Mobility Initiative. So the Urban Mobility Knowledge and Innovation Community, so-called KIC, is an initiative of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, which is gathering key players in the urban mobility field across cities and citizens, research and academia, businesses, industry, and startup. So this initiative aims to accelerate the societal impact of urban mobility solutions by fostering innovation and transformation. So I'm your host of today's webinar on a new mobility paradigm for health, cities, and environment. This is the second webinar in the Mobility Talks series, which is hosted by the Urban Mobility KIC. And I'm here today with 3 colleagues of mine, Veronica, whom you have already met, Bernadette and Daniel in the background, who are assisting me to ensure a smooth online event as we continue now. So presentations and video recordings will be made available after the event on the eiturbanmobility.eu website. This is a very brief introduction of this webinar. Veronica, I can now introduce the speakers. Is that all right?
Yes, sure. Good. Please go ahead.
So I'm very, very happy to introduce you our 3 speakers who are joining us from Barcelona, London, and Paris. So hello to you, and a warm welcome to Marc Neuenhuizen. Oh la la, always difficult. Marc is Director of Urban Planning, Environment and Health and IS Global Barcelona, an Institute for Global Health. Marc is a world-leading expert in environmental exposure assessment, epidemiology, and health risk impact assessment, with a strong focus and interest on healthy urban living. Hi, Marc. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
A warm welcome also to Caroline Watson. She leads from London the transport and urban planning team of C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. Caroline works with leading cities to transition to zero-emission transportation. She's also leading on C40's Green and Healthy Streets Declaration, where 35 cities have committed to procure only zero-emission buses and introduce zero-emission areas in their cities. A warm welcome to you, Caroline. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Last but not least, Professor Carlos Moreno. Hi, Carlos. He's Scientific Director of the Chair Entrepreneurship, Territory, Innovation with the University Panthéon-Sorbonne in Paris. Carlos is a scientist, is a pioneer of the smart city, and an entrepreneur with a disruptive startup. Maybe you can tell us more about your entrepreneurship startup. Carlos is also a scientific advisor to major national and international players, including the mayor of the city of Paris, Madame Anne Hidalgo, as a special envoy smart cities. Welcome, Carlos. I would also like to welcome all the attendees. As Veronica said earlier, we have received around 360 registrations, and I can see we have some 110 attendees who are currently connected online. Thank you for joining, and I hope you are all well. Veronica, I think we would like to learn a little bit more about these 110 attendees. Shall we launch the first poll, please?
Sure, Florinda. I'm going to launch it now, so everybody of you can start voting and telling us a little bit more about you. Thanks, Florinda.
That's exactly. We would just like to know where do you work so we can see who is our target audience today and be able to well address your questions, curiosities during this webinar. We will close the poll, Veronica, when you give me a sign.
Yes, sure. It's going pretty fast, actually. So, but I'll let you know.
Fantastic. So, well, let's get started. I have my notes in front of me, and I shall be unmuted. Very good. So today's topic is extremely actual, you can agree with me. And it's also very closer to my heart, as Mark knows well, as we have been working together for some time. So today we are going to talk about urban health and well-being, mobility and accessibility, and urbanism. So as urban centers in Europe begin to reopen after flattening the coronavirus curve, we want to take a look today with you and with other speakers at how cities have dealt with the COVID-19, to what extent this pandemic has affected urban health, and how planners can reconcile urban proximity frameworks with the new normal. This health pandemic has undoubtedly reshaped the way that we live and move around cities, starting from home working, as you have all experienced, I guess. We have witnessed that public transport and shared mode use has dropped drastically. People are back in the saddle. There's a rush to buy bicycles and e-scooters, which is nice on the one hand. Cities are anticipating a low carbon strategy out of lockdowns by respacing roads to boost active travel and relieve pressure on public transport. So the question which leads to the webinar today is, could this be an occasion for actual change in the places we live? And is this crisis a trigger, the trigger to shift to a new mobility paradigm in the future, in the near future? So today I would like to exchange some ideas with the speakers and with you through the chat box on the contribution that researchers, city leaders, and innovators can give to address this challenge and on the way forward for cities to recover. So which new tools cities and practitioners need to tackle emergency challenges like this one? But lastly, if we could touch upon this, another important topic, what shall be the role of the civil society and the citizens in the experimentation period, which is following the crisis? But Veronica, before giving the floor to our first speaker, maybe we can close the poll and take the look at our audience. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm going to share the results. Pretty interesting, actually. I'm sharing the results now. You should see it.
I see we have a large audience of academic and research institutions, nearly 1/4 of the audience. Local authorities as well represented in among the target groups I see, followed by consultants and industry in the mobility field. As citizens, people passing by and curious and interested about the topic, that's important. There's more to do to reach out to these groups, as we really want to have strong citizens engaging. And then other. Feel free to use the chat to say, what is this other, so we can learn more about you. Thank you. Our first speaker is Mark. Mark will illustrate data and evidence from his research work on the impact that this crisis has had on health and environment in European cities. And being himself a resident in Barcelona, Mark will also touch upon the city's adaptation strategy and how Barcelona is planning for healthier and more resilient communities. So Mark, the floor is now yours.
Many thanks. I'll just talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on transport and health as we see it. You know, I think as a society, we were hoping to get towards more sustainable and healthy transportation. And my talk hopefully gives some idea that we're trying to do that. And hopefully the COVID crisis will actually accelerate that a little bit. I mean, that's the premise that I'm actually working with. Oops. And now my presentation doesn't go forward. So with the COVID crisis, we've got many questions, and already I've got some answers, including where we're going. But first, to put this a bit in a context, as you all know, we've already had a problem. I mean, more than 4 million people die each year as a result of ambient air pollution. Transport contributes quite a bit to that. More than 3 million deaths per year due to the lack of physical activity. Again, transport contributes to that. Then we got more than 1 million deaths due to traffic fatalities. And of course, I mean, we still have the climate crisis, population growth, urbanization, particularly in Europe, we're quite urbanized, but other places in the world, it's still going on. We have a fairly good idea that there's a relationship now between urban planning, how we design the city, how people get around, their behavior, how this leads to environmental exposures and to morbidity or mortality. I won't go into detail here, but this is now quite well described in a way. And for example, if you look at a city like Barcelona, a recent health impact assessment showed that there were almost 3,000 premature deaths each year as a result of what we call suboptimal urban and transport planning in the city. This is about 20% of the total mortality. This partly comes because the current planning doesn't, causes a lot of air pollution, noise, heat island effects. Also, it takes up space, like for the cars, that can be used in a better way, like for green space, and also due to the lack of physical activity. So the impact is very large. Now, what we've seen for the COVID crisis is that there are a couple of measures that are quite effective in reducing the transmission. One is the hygiene, the hand washing. I won't go into this. But then the other one is the physical distancing, trying to stay away from others. Generally, it's about 1.5 meters. Sometimes it's 2 meters. Other societies talking about 1 meter. And they're quite effective. And this is actually how affects our current use of public space and also our transport, what we have. Now, one of the things also what we saw during the lockdown, what we had, for example, in Barcelona, I've got some numbers here, is that we saw quite a strong reduction of physical activity. People were not moving around for about 40%. Also an increase in poor mental health, domestic violence, about 20%. And the interesting thing was also there was a reduction of about 60 or 70, 80% in traffic, but reduced the air pollution levels by about 70 to 90% and the noise levels by about 10 dB. Now, these are very large reductions. Initially people thought this is not possible to have these large reductions. Actually, but it was possible. And the lockdown showed that these are, that we can actually do this, if we do it well at the same time. Unfortunately, we also saw a large reduction in green space visits, what is not very good for mental health. As we know, green space is very good for mental health. So when we have this 1.5 meter distance society, what's probably going to stay around for a bit, it's going to have an impact on the use of public space and on transport. And here I made a very simple matrix, how the different transport modes, what is their impact on public space, health benefits, environmental impact, but also the transmission rate for the virus. Now, if you look, for example, for cars, the transmission rate is very low because you're well isolated from other people, but it's great. But as you know, the car takes up a lot of public space. Like in Barcelona, 60% of public space is taken up by the car, although it's only 20% of the transport mode. Also, it doesn't have so much health benefits and it has large environmental impacts. On the other side, the public transport mode, a lot of people are not using it at the moment, although it was a very popular way of getting around the city because of the high transmission risk perception in terms of public space, health benefits, and environmental impacts. I put them down as medium. On the other side, when you look at active transport modes like walking and cycling, the transmission rate is actually very low. You're generally outdoors, not so close to others. Also, it doesn't take up so much public space and at large health benefits due to physical activity and low environmental impact. So this is in a way what you would think is the way to go, what we've been trying to go. And of course, many cities have recognized this, and this is now well described. For example, Paris is trying to keep the cars out, what they're saying after the lockdown. London making car-free areas to also put more terraces down for eating and drinking. Milan says that they put in more cycling lanes and also reduce car use. Unfortunately, what we see in some cities, though, like here in Barcelona, and these are some data that Veronica Sanchez presented not so long ago here, is that we see a doubling of the cycling in the city, but that's only the cycling before was a few percent and it's gone up by a few percent. But what is more worrying, what we're seeing is what I was saying is the public transport use. Before it was about a third of the trips were by public transport, and this reduced to 20%. And the car, what was about 26%, has gone up to a third. So we see some clear differences that people vote kind of more for safer or perceived safer transport modes. Now, I think what we have is some of the solutions also, what are come up there, what have been also long-term solutions even before COVID, is that we need to rethink how we use land, how we use our cities, also reduce car dependency, move towards public and active transportation, and the greening of cities, although I want to address the last one. I'll give a quick update of what some of the others. One of the ones I think promising new uses of urban space is the Superblock in Barcelona. On the left side, you see the current system, what we have, the current grid system in the city, where you have one-way traffic going up and down, left and right. We have a grid system for most of the cities. And the idea of the Superblock is to cut off 4 junctions in a block of 9 and don't allow motorized traffic to go through it, but they go around it. And inside you get more active transportation and also more green space. The idea is to get 500 Superblocks in the city. At the moment we're at number 3, so the progress is not so good, but you know, they've started at least. And here at the top you see that Superblock in Sant Antoni, what was before, where cars go through the street, and at the bottom is after, where the cars have been banned, motorized traffic, and you see more green space, more places for people to sit, etc. Doing some modeling, we found that it reduces the car use quite a bit in the city, about 20%, also reduction in air pollution, noise, increase in green space, and decrease of surface temperature. We looked at what are the health impacts in terms of this. I mean, and we found that you could almost prevent 700 deaths per year in Barcelona if you would introduce the health impacts, partly or large part due to NO2 reductions, but also to noise reductions, reduction in heat island effects, increase in green spaces, and some increase in physical activity, although that's likely underestimated because we were very conservative. So you can see a different land use actually can, you know, is good for the environment, but also for health, and changes the transport modes considerably to much more healthier transport. Another idea that's being going around, get quite a bit of traction, is the 50-minute city introduced by Paris, where the idea is that all your destinations, including work, school, shops, are within 50 minutes of your residence. I mean, so this is a different use of how you look at the city. And I think this is quite promising if we can implement this, because it also encourages much more healthier mobility, but of course it takes a very large effort to actually make this happen. Now, I come from Holland and I'm very biased. I love cycling, and unfortunately Holland and Denmark are one of the few countries where cycling rates are very high, and I would like to encourage other places also to start cycling. Because I think that it's got great advantages. I mean, you know, that it reduces the risk of premature mortality. It combines the transport with the gym. So if you go cycle to work, you don't need to go to the gym. Less air pollution, less noise, zero CO2 emissions. The bicycle takes up much less space than the car, and also creates more happiness amongst its users. We know that the physical activity benefits well outweigh the risk of air pollution and accidents. And so it's a great way forward to move around, in particular for slightly longer distance travel. I mean, for walking is good up to 2-3 kilometers. Cycling, you can do up to 7 to 10 kilometers, or even longer if you've got an electric bike. And this is one of my favorite examples. I mean, Utrecht been very much encouraging cycling, and you see a lot of cyclists here, even almost not enough space for them. and on the road for cars, you don't see any cars. So, I mean, I'm hoping that we can move forward to this kind of model and encourage it actually more. Of course, it's very important that we use a multisectoral systemic approach to our cities. I mean, we need to bring different people together. I come from a public health background. I can say what is healthy, what's not, but I can't make changes. So I'm very keen to work with transport planners, urban planners, but also the education sector, for example, because we see that still a lot of kids go to school by car, what should be in a way discouraged for many different reasons. Can it actually happen? I think in many cities it actually can. I mean, here it is one of my favorite examples for Seoul in North Korea. Before they had a busy motorway on the left, then they got rid of the motorway and made a nice waterway with green space and a very small road next to it. A much nicer environment actually to be. Hamburg says they're planning to be car-free by 2034. There are more cities thinking about that. Again, you know, this brings great opportunities for sustainable and healthy travel. One of my favorite examples is Vauban, a neighborhood in Freiburg, car-free neighborhoods with sustainable housing, lots of green space, wonderful place to live. Unfortunately, a bit too wonderful. It's becoming very expensive there, but you know, it's a great example of how actually you can live in a fairly compact and nice way without being reliant on the car, but using public and active transportation. We recently published a couple of books on the topic, very good reading. I'm happy to send you any copies if you're interested, electric copies, I must say, for that. And I recently wrote an article bringing together many of these kind of examples, you know, because I think it's important to bring sustainability issues together with livability issues and also healthy health in cities. And I think using a certain strategy, we can actually go that way. Many thanks for listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. And I hope that you agree with me that green cities give healthy people, active cities give healthy people, clean cities lead to healthy people, and social cities. I didn't address this, but it's an important issue as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was a nice presentation. You kept the time. I'm amazed. You touched upon already the 50-minute city. It's a different use you said on how we can look at cities, and I'm happy to see and say that Carlos Moreno, who is behind this concept, is with us, so he can go deep into explaining the elements of the 15-minute cities and how many efforts, as you said, are needed to make this happen. But I have a question for you, and maybe we can take one I saw in the chat box. You said that we saw people cycling more, but many are asking whether the cycling infrastructure will stay with us after the crisis. But most importantly, how can we create lasting habits for more sustainable mobility? People start cycling now, maybe using the scooter, but as soon as public transport is working full capacity, how do we ensure that people maintain these habits?
Yes, so I think what's extremely important is to put the infrastructure there, safe cycling infrastructure in case for cycling, but also for pedestrians. Remember that pedestrians are also super important in cities. Unfortunately, often they don't get enough space actually. The sidewalks are often very small and we need to expand the sidewalks because, you know, if you give people space, they actually come. The other thing is for cycling is what I said, most people fear cycling because they don't feel safe. We recently did a study around 167 cities in Europe where we looked at the relationship between cycling lane provisions, safe cycling, and the percentage of mode share of cycling. And up to about 25% mode share, you see almost a linear direct relationship between how much cycling infrastructure is available and the percentage of people cycling. You know, as soon as you put cycling paths in there, people will come actually, because it's a great way of getting around. But you need to make them safe, you need to make them segregated. Don't just paint some lines on the road because the cars will get in there and that scares the cyclist. But I think, you know, what you see now with the temporary cycling lane infrastructure, many more people are cycling and that actually helps a lot. Here in Barcelona, also they put in more than 100 kilometers of cycling lane in the last few years. And you see actually many, many more people cycling. The advantage is also that it reduces the road space for cars and the cars slowing down, because, you know, as you know, cars that go too fast are a big problem as well. And in a way, we should restrict all the speeds of cars on roads up to 30 kilometers, because the risk of traffic fatalities is much less in that way. So I think the key is to invest in infrastructure, and you know, with the new Green Deal, what we're coming up, I mean, I think it would be a great investment in to put in much more cycling infrastructure, but also, of course, don't forget the pedestrians, because they're extremely important as well, and they deserve their own infrastructure as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, very important. Especially on the investment in infrastructure, I want to make a point here, and picking up on a question that I see in the chat, because it was posted twice. Just very briefly, to reply to the people who are interested on the econometrics, well, mainly the economic effects of the Superblock approach on shops and businesses, because I see the idea is to bring public life back to city streets, so make a space for people, but also attract businesses where people can go and attract these people in the streets. But what is the effect of closing off cars on these businesses?
We don't know at the moment, because as what I said, only 3 have been introduced, but most of the time you see many more people on the street. I think in other cities where we've seen where they close off the streets for cars, there's always been this concern that, you know, people can't come to the shops anymore, and there will be a reduction in how much they sell. Actually, most case studies have shown that there's an increase in how much how much the shops sell, and actually it's good for retail to close off the streets, because, you know, people that go by car don't buy as much as people that walk or cycle, and so that in a way it's actually beneficial. I mean, I can't remember where the website is. I saw it a number of times, and I was looking for it myself the other day, with a whole range of different case studies where they show the economic effects of closing streets for cars. But so far, I think it's only been positive and not negative.
Mark, I see there are lots of questions for you in the chat. Take the time to reply if you like, while we move to the second speaker, and then we will conclude with some ideas, final ideas from your side as well towards the end. So I would like now to move to the second speaker, Caroline Watson, still online, very good. So she will illustrate the work of the C40 Cities and the global mayor's COVID-19 recovery task to rebuild our cities and economies in a way that improve public health and reduces inequality and addresses the climate crisis. So Caroline, now the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to try to, there we go. That looks better, doesn't it? You can all see my screen, can't you? Okay. Well, thanks for having me. I'm Caroline Watson. I'm Programme Director for Transport and Urban Planning at C40 Cities. I'm going to actually echo a lot of what Mark said, but hopefully I will, in a complementary way rather than a repetitive way, hopefully, and talk to you about what's happening in the cities that we work with at C40, and specifically how we're galvanising mayors to try to respond to the current crisis. So for those of you that aren't familiar with C40, we are a global network of 96 of the world's leading cities on climate change. C40 is actually driven by our cities, so our steering committee is made up of mayors. So that's just a bit of background for everybody. So just see how I move through the slides. Sorry about this. Okay, here we go. So right now, as you can imagine, all of our cities are completely focused on how to respond to the COVID epidemic. You know, I don't think there's a city in the whole of C40 that hasn't been affected in some way. So they're doing this in a number of ways, specifically around transport, because as we all know, transport is highly affected by the virus. So a number of things that are happening. Auckland, for example, is a really nice example of where they're using technology to really try to respond to the crisis. They've introduced a mobile app to help with social distancing on transport. So the idea being that as a passenger, you would stand at the bus stop, or even maybe even your house if you live close enough to the bus stop, to see where the next bus is coming, where there's actually space. So the idea is that you wouldn't board the bus unless you know it was safe, but also it builds confidence and gives people information so that they can ensure that they're safe and able to social distance when they're using public transport. Cities around the world are also deploying staff to work on different things. So different things to what their day job is. So that obviously has a huge impact on public transport, for example, but also just transport policies in the city. So some of the people that we would normally speak to have been deployed, for example, to food banks in certain American cities, for example, or they are changing sites around the city to be able to be used for testing. So these are obviously not things that they would normally be doing in their day jobs, 6 months ago or even 3 or 4 months ago. So it obviously has a huge knock-on effect in cities. But also we're seeing a huge amount of time in disinfecting services and protecting workers and passengers from the virus, as well as Mark has already talked about, things like bike lanes being installed. So there's a huge variety in terms of the way cities are responding to the crisis. So to give a few more examples of things that are happening around the world, in Milan, for example, we've seen 35 kilometers of streets rededicated and repurposed for walking and cycling. And London's already been mentioned in terms of their major streets, including London Bridge, which is obviously one of the most busy streets in London, being limited to buses, pedestrians and cyclists, limited just to buses, pedestrians and cyclists, so private vehicles can't access those. So these are fundamental changes to the way that some of London's busiest streets are operating. But then, in Latin America, we have Mexico City, where the bike mayor has proposed over 130 kilometers of temporary bike lanes. And then in Vancouver, anyone who's been to Vancouver will hopefully be familiar with Stanley Park, a big green space in the city, which has also been shut to vehicles. So cities have been taking relatively, let's say, ambitious and radical action in response to the crisis. So what does this mean going forward? As we've heard already, there's a huge impact on public transport during the lockdown period. But what does this actually mean going forward? So capacity has been hugely reduced, and this is to enable social distancing. So as cities are coming out of lockdown, for those cities that are coming out of lockdown, to maintain safety on the public transport is only really able to operate at about 30% capacity. So what that means is the same number of vehicles are probably running, but at the same time, you've got 70% less passengers on board. So there's a huge knock-on effect for these cities that normally have jam-packed public transport. But people are obviously being put off using public transport and getting into their private cars, which is adding to congestion in cities. And then this is obviously having a major impact on revenues. And just to use London as an example, again, London public transport was completely dependent on fares and revenues, which has meant that they had to negotiate a huge bailout from the national government to keep going. So I think one of the key lessons from this whole experience really is that public transport is a public service, and that obviously if people stop using it and the revenues stop, it has a huge knock-on impact on the service. So is that something we can really afford to see happen in our cities going forward? And then just to reiterate, the expense of running a service at 30% capacity, you obviously have a huge impact on revenues, but also as a result of COVID, you've got a lot higher running costs because you're having to spend a lot more time with staff cleaning. And then you've got the awful, tragic consequences of staff being off sick or even dying because they are the key frontline workers. So there's a number of ramifications for public transport services. So this slide really is just to reiterate some of those messages that we've already shared. But another example in terms of impact is Wuhan. And the Chinese were obviously some of the first cities to come out of lockdown. So everybody's looking to them to see how their public transport and their transport infrastructure generally is bouncing back. But what we have seen so far in Wuhan is that public transport journeys fell from 56% to 24% after lockdown, and car use increased up to from 34% to 66%. So obviously, to reiterate some of the messages that Mark's given in terms of the impacts of a post-COVID society, the huge risk is that people get back in their cars. Other patterns we're seeing around the world is, and especially in Europe, is the impact on vehicle restriction schemes. So a number of cities in the UK, and then we've also seen in Milan that they did suspend their charging mechanisms, so Area C in Milan and Area B. And then the UK, they've delayed the clean air zones. Although there is some positive things we're seeing. For example, in London, they suspended all of their charging, but they have reintroduced it now, and they've introduced it with tighter restrictions because they needed revenue, but also fundamentally important is they saw the amount of congestion had gone back to pre-COVID levels, so they needed to try to manage that. And then Paris and Mexico City are two other examples of where charging has come, or Paris didn't suspend it, but Mexico City have brought back their charging. But I think all the challenges that cities faced previously in terms of introducing charging mechanisms and low emission zones have only been heightened because there's more pressure, especially with the economic crisis now that's following, there's more pressure on the cities not to introduce measures that will be seen to put more regulation on businesses and poorer income families. And then we're also seeing impacts on the zero emission vehicle market potentially. So we know that vehicle sales have obviously dropped significantly. And with an economic crisis, it's unlikely that they could pick up quickly. But in terms of impact in terms of zero emission vehicles, what we are seeing is that some cities and some countries are introducing bailouts for the auto industry. And there is a mix. So countries like France, for example, have specifically said that they will not bail out vehicles unless they are zero, they basically only want to bail out companies that are focusing on zero emission vehicles. Whereas other countries and cities in some parts of the world are introducing cash subsidies, which are not favouring zero emission vehicles in particular, but they include ICE vehicles, which is not something we would like to see happening. The US, they were already planning to scrap emissions regulations, but I'm sure the support for that will probably increase, particularly from the auto industry under the current situation. And then there's obviously a lot of pressure in Europe on the legislators to delay changes to CO2 emissions. So these are all things that are a risk in terms of the zero emission vehicle market. But I think one important thing to say is, although models for electric vehicles may be delayed as a result of some manufacturers switching in the short term to build things like ventilators in response to COVID, which has obviously been incredibly positive that they've been able to do that. So that may delay models. I think the other positive thing about seeing companies switch so quickly to changing what they're building shows that all their arguments against building electric vehicles are quite difficult to hold, because if you can build a ventilator instead of a car, why can't you build an electric car? So I think that's an interesting point. And then obviously we've got the extremely low oil prices that aren't necessarily being passed through to the consumer just yet in all places, but I think that's also a huge risk in terms of if the oil prices are low, then it obviously makes the low fuel costs of electric vehicles less attractive to people. And then this slide here is just really to make the point about land use and the big challenges we're going to potentially see. I mean, especially if COVID is something that cities and societies generally don't get rid of completely, I think there is likely to be an appetite from house buyers to move away from dense areas and try to live in places. If you've been, we've seen the you know, the impact of lockdown on mental health and physical health as a result of Mark's slides. And I think it makes the point that people would love to have a garden. If they're going to have a lockdown again, they would rather live somewhere where they can have a garden, you know, and not be stuck in an apartment. So I think you may see shifts from people's behaviour to move out into more suburban areas. And then obviously with impacts of the recession, this could have impacts on retail space, which then has a knock-on effect on the urban environment. But positive things we hopefully are hoping to see more of as wider pavements, the 15-minute city policies, which I know Carlos is going to talk about. And then the other thing that's really come out of this situation is informal settlement upgrading and how important it is, because these are the communities that are really at risk, of huge risk of disease in the situation. So I'll try to speed up a little bit because I know we don't have too much time. But I mean, just some examples of game changers really of things that are happening. And I think there's some nice examples here where we have seen pop-up cycle routes and expanding walking networks. Bogota is on here as an example. We would expect these measures are probably going to be needed for the next 2 years because COVID doesn't look like it's going away. There is an opportunity here for gathering data to really understand what the health implications and the also just people's demand in terms of people's behaviour, in terms of really understanding the benefits, I guess, of these short-term actions to then support permanent implementation, hopefully at a later date, or to keep these measures in place. We're seeing many cities reallocating street space. There's some nice examples on here. With Milan, bars and restaurants have expanded outside. So the idea being that you can actually take parking spaces or pavement space to extend the space of your restaurant to enable social distancing. And then similar things happening in Paris where they've taken space outside of shops so that they can actually, as you can see in this picture, the shop is kind of outside in the parking space. That way it gives them more space as well to social distance. And then I'm going to talk about the C40 Mayor's Task Force. So this has been our leaders' response really to the crisis in terms of how can mayors of some of the world's biggest cities really respond to the crisis, and what does a green recovery look like and what cities' roles in that. So that's the goal of the mayoral task force. So the task force is led by 11 mayors. As you can see here, there's a diverse group of mayors from around the world, and these mayors have been picked partly based on their previous experience of dealing with global economic and health crises. So they're the leaders of the task force, but the task force meetings also include a wider number of C40 mayors who can join that so that they can problem solve and really try to problem solve the crisis together, but also then go away and implement solutions in their own cities. And this is what the task force is aiming to deliver. Firstly, they're developing this month a thought leadership statement, which is being supported by expert papers on a number of issues, including a range of issues on transportation, including how do you deal with the zero emission vehicles in the current crisis and the green recovery, informal settlements and land use planning, mass transit. So a number of expert thought papers there. They're also developing a green recovery advocacy toolkit for mayors, so that will also be published this month. They are engaging beyond just the mayors themselves. They're engaging a broad and powerful global coalition of businesses, labour, civil society and youth groups to support the development and implementation of a green and just recovery. And I think the just is just as important as the green. And they're utilising a robust set of communication tools to assist mayors in discussing the climate crisis in a post-COVID world, because what we're really focused on is how do we have an economic recovery that is green and actually tackles the climate crisis, because the climate crisis cannot be something that we put on hold because we don't have time for that. And then together they're engaging global advisors with expertise across C40's regions. So my final slide, how do we support a green and just recovery? So there's a lot of information on this slide, and I think it's really, really hard to prioritize. So, there are so many things that do need to be addressed, but I think on the left-hand side, we see the big fights. What are the things that our cities really want to, I say big fight, it sounds a bit confrontational, but I think, you know, these are the big issues that our cities really need to tackle and want to tackle with industry and national governments. So protecting funding for transportation, making sure auto industry stimulus is ZEV only, maintaining ambition on vehicle regulations, protecting density, for example, and then other things that are also equally important, but are maybe a bit more of a quick win for the cities themselves, is building the evidence for air quality and road safety to enable the measures they've already taken to stay in place. And that is linked to creating more road space for walking and cycling and mass transit, incentivizing bikes, and then investment in bicycle infrastructure and electric buses and charging infrastructure, and also trying to protect more green space and create more green space in the city. And then the final column here just address the number of other measures that the cities are really aiming to focus on, but these are more focused on things they were going to do anyway, but making sure they still do them. So ensuring that any planned transit expansions that were already planned will go ahead, advocating for transit-oriented development policies, even if transit ridership is unsteady and reducing, and then continuing support for transit operators to move to cleaner technologies, and then finally helping mayors make the health and economic case for vehicle restrictions. So these are all the things that C40 is focused on, and we're really trying to support our mayors to deliver. So there's a lot going on. So that comes to the end of my presentation. So I hope some of that was useful.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. Very, very useful. Lots of great examples. I was taking some notes. Can you just say a few words, because you haven't mentioned it, but I know it's existing and it's a great tool that you have put in place, and not just you, many other organizations, but we have you on the panel. What is the C40 Knowledge Hub? Can you just share your thoughts about this, where to find it? What is it about?
Yes, of course. I can put the link in the chat box, but the Knowledge Hub is a resource that we have created. There's a huge emphasis right now on COVID response, but the Knowledge Hub really is a climate resource, and it's targeted at cities, but beyond the 94 cities that belong to C40. So the idea is that any city can go to that and access useful resources on the climate challenge, but also on responding to COVID. But I think the resources generally are anyone who's working in this space, hopefully it's interesting and useful for them as well. So I can share that link in the chat box.
Yes, thank you. That will be very, very useful. So when you launch this initiative, I understand you have had a global response, so cities and practitioners can post their resources. So you have kind of created an open toolbox. My question for you, who are daily working with cities, not just with mayors, but also with the technical experts, do you think that cities have now the right toolbox to address this type of emerging challenges also in the future, or there's still a way to go? I know the climate crisis challenge is still there, but are we getting somewhere with these new tools?
I don't know if there's an easy answer to this question. I mean, I think cities have obviously been in a situation where they've had to react very quickly. And and I think this is part of the reason the mayoral task force has been so kind of, I say popular, it's not quite the right word, but you hopefully understand what I mean in terms of the mayors at C40 have been very keen to talk to each other and learn from each other during this crisis, because no one knows exactly what to do, but they can learn very quickly from each other, especially cities that sadly had to go through the crisis first. So I think there's an element of learning from what's happened so far, but also at the same time, a lot of cities are either still in the midst of the crisis or getting ready for a second wave, or, you know, there's a huge risk there's going to be a second wave. So I don't feel that there's necessarily a lot of answers or lessons that it's kind of like there's nothing concrete in terms of this is exactly the right thing to do. But at the same time, I think cities have obviously learned a lot from how they've had to react quickly so far. So I guess in answer to your question, I think there's a lot of useful information that we are sharing on our Knowledge Hub that hopefully will help cities, because they're learning from each other. You know, all the information we have on our Knowledge Hub is from our cities. This isn't us, C40, trying to tell people what to do. It's very much sharing best practice and good examples of how cities have responded. But I think only time will tell really whether everybody has the right toolkit or the right resources to respond. I think the positive side is we've seen lots of really successful actions in terms of reallocation of road space, creating social distancing. So that's been positive in the sense that cities have been able to respond in a way that has kept their citizens safer. I guess what we're also seeing now is, in a lot of situations, is people getting into their cars. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges at the moment, is for cities to try to find a way to keep people safe while maintaining good public transport and maintaining good active travel, and not have us returning to an even worse car culture that exacerbates congestion and air pollution and CO2 emissions.
Yes, thank you very much. I see there are questions in the chat. Maybe I can invite you as well to take a look and respond to people who were posting some discussion points in there. So thank you, Caroline. We'll get back to you towards the end of the presentation. And then now I give the floor to Professor Carlos Moreno. So from Caroline, we have seen, again, many more examples on how cities are planning for a low carbon recovery. We have heard from her what are the challenges, the fear of people getting back to using their cars, the industry which needs to follow somehow in helping people to be confident again in using public transport by sanitizing or putting in place new measures for booking seats. We don't know what the right solutions are, but on this point, I would like to share with you that the Urban Mobility Kit has launched a special call COVID-19, which was closed some weeks ago. Some experts have evaluated the results of this call. So new projects tackling especially COVID-19 in the mobility sector will be launching soon. So by the end of the year, we may see interesting results, new services and products for cities who, as Caroline said, maybe still in the midst, they know which direction to take. So some good results which have been validating and proven safe for the citizens may be available in the next month. So we'll keep you posted through our website and channels. But before giving the floor to Carlos, I wanted to say that we have seen both Mark and Caroline, including in their presentation, a reference to the 15-minute cities. So this type of policy seems to be a possible solution to bring destinations closer to people as a way to reduce travel demand and drive local resilience and sustainability. This is what I read in Caroline's email. And this is also answering some of the questions I see in the chat. This idea of making the city local, to what extent we can work on a neighborhood dimension when we're actually living in large cities, the metropolitan city scale, but also how to make this link between suburban areas and the city center. So I would like to continue our dialogue on this theme and welcome Professor Carlos Moreno as our third speaker. So as I said at the beginning, he will talk about the need to rebuild cities in the long term based on a new approach to urban spaces, which takes better account of the different needs that each and every one of us has, and maybe moving from the logic of mobility towards a more of a logic of accessibility to basic urban facilities and services. So I'm giving now the floor to Carlos Moreno.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Florinda, for this kind of invitation. Thank you for EIT Urban Mobility. And of course, thank you to Caroline and Mark for quoting me and quoting the research work about the 15-minute city. I would share my screen. This is okay now?
It's okay, Carlos. It's working. So
this
now...
is not a good. Sorry, excuse me.
You just have to share full screen.
Okay, I think that this is a good presentation.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much for this invitation to share with you the concept of 15-minute city. In fact, I want to discuss cities of proximity because we want to explore the mobilities in city. My point of view for 6 years is in fact to explore another aspect of mobility. This is the concept of all mobility, toward all mobility. The real question today is to understand the urban and territorial mutations, because we live today in a new world, because the world is changing. It's changing quickly. In fact, when I was invited to discuss about mobility in cities, of course, my real question, before to discuss about solutions, about infrastructures or new technical solutions for that, is to explore this question. What kind of city do we want to live in? What is the city, in fact, for being in the good condition? What is the quality of life of cities? The reality is that in several cities, we could invest, including massively, for developing new infrastructures, underground, metro, train, all kinds of technical solutions with the mechanical, electronical, and computer science solution. But the question is always open. What is the shape of city do we want to live? This is, do you have this picture? This is very familiar, because this is the former paradigm with the hyperdensity, minerality, with diesel car, all kinds of cars, tunnels, etc., and including McDonald's here. And this is a lifestyle. We need today to evoke what is the lifestyle we want. This picture is in Paris. This is the Railway Express area. And this is in fact the massive transportation for people, 1,200,000 people every day, for going from the east of Paris to west of Paris. Every day. What? Why these people should take this rail express in these conditions? And here you have a current mall for shopping, for going to restaurants, for going to the cinema. The question for me is to explore this new reality. What is the shape of my city when we want to live in the better conditions? Today, when the COVID-19 pandemic crisis happened, we don't have the choice. We need to decide what is the way for living in the next month, in the next years, in the next decades. Caroline and Mark explained very well the new challenges in this way, to return to use diesel car massively, to change the paradigm for living. I think that is, if we want to explore this way, we need, in fact, to clarify our target in the next decade. And of course, if we wanted to develop the sustainable cities, the sustainable institution, the sustainable organization, the sustainable territories, what is in reality the sustainable attitude? In fact, the sustainable attitude is not only the ecology, the environment. The sustainable development is the convergence between the environment topic, economic topic, and the social impact. If we wanted to live in a sustainable city, we need to have at the same time a city viable. This is the convergence between ecological and economic challenges. Equitable, this is the convergence between the economic and social challenges. And variable, this is the convergence between the ecological and social challenge. We need to have, in all circumstances, a real complete policy, urban policy for a sustainable way. The SDG today is the guideline for the next 2 decades. The first one, of course, the SDG 13, climate action, because if we wanted to survive, I mean the humanity wanted to survive at the end of this century, we need absolutely to reach the carbon neutrality at the horizon 2050. For that, we have only 10 years. This decade until 2030 for reducing at least for 45% of CO2 emissions. We say that the people today live in cities. 54% of people live today in cities. 77% in Europe. 80% of people in Latin America live in cities. We need for that to change our paradigm in cities if we wanted to obtain a real quality of life. And the real question is not what is the better infrastructures for moving cities. The real question today is how could we define another way for living in cities, for developing the essential activities, for developing my human activities. Of course, in Paris, we are very proud because we live in a workable city, in bikeable city. We have in several cities around the world, Pontevedra, in Spain, for 24 years they live without cars. And Copenhagen and different cities, in fact, we are changing the lifestyle. In the case of the city of Paris, of course, this is the real roadmap because the mayor, the former mayor, Mr. Delanoë, and the current mayor, Ms. Anne Hidalgo, have been starting an ambitious urban policy for changing mobility. We have today in Paris 1,000 kilometers of lane bikes. And of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, we have increased this way for managing with better conditions the mobility in cities, in particular with the coronavirus lanes. This is the tactical urbanism for keeping the streets dedicated to bikes. But in this picture, we could note the transition of the paradigm. This picture, 25 years ago, you have the Rue de Rivoli, one of the most important streets in Paris, at the heart of Paris, with 7 lines dedicated to cars. And this is today, in the COVID-19 period, 0 car, only buses and taxis, and totally dedicated for low carbon mobilities, bike, electrical scooters, or others. And this is the situation a few months ago with the same street regularly shared between cars and bikes. But the real question continues to be, how could we develop a sustainable city? And in fact, the vision with the city of proximity changes today the paradigm, because we want, with the city of proximity, we wanted to introduce a new key element: the time. My time, your time, our time. In fact, the different technological solutions for urban mobility don't consider the importance of time, in particular for having useful time for all kinds of activities. The urban organizations, the last decades, in fact, proposed a shape of city based on very important distance between two essential activities: my home, to live in my home, and to work. And in fact, mobility today was the technical solutions for joining from my work, from my home to my work, but we don't consider the importance of the useful time. In fact, if we wanted to develop a sustainable city in the convergence of the environmental, economic, and social challenge, we need today consider the importance of time. This is the key element, this is the kernel of the concept of the 15-minute city. This is not a new solution for mobility. 15-minute city, this is your paradigm for better living in cities, for changing our relationship with myself, my family, my friends, my work colleagues, my environment. In fact, this is the new lifestyle. This is very important because the temporality of the 15-minute city is in reality a new proposal for living differently in cities. You have in 1 minute, 15 seconds, a short video in French and in English.
La ville du quart d'heure, c'est l'humain au bout de la rue. C'est au cœur de la ville, mettre le cœur des hommes. C'est les services de proximité accessibles à tous, à moins d'un quart d'heure, à pied ou en vélo. C'est la nature, la biodiversité, tout près de nous. Des rues piétonnes, des rues végétalisées, moins de circulation. C'est les écoles ouvertes sur les quartiers. La ville des quarts d'heure, c'est un lieu, plusieurs usages. C'est quitter la mobilité subie pour aller vers la mobilité choisie. C'est dire bonjour à tout le monde. C'est des services qui permettent de rendre une ville apaisée. C'est pouvoir vivre plus librement dans la ville, profitant de son quartier. C'est la ville pour tous.
Okay, I want to finish with the methodology and several examples. The methodology. What are in fact the essential urban social functions when we live in city? In fact, in my research work, I found that we need 6 urban essential functions: to live, to work, to supply, to care, to learn, and to enjoy. If I have the possibility to access within a short perimeter, 15 minutes by foot or by low carbon mobility, by bike and other. I have the possibility for accessing of each one of 6 urban social functions. The 15-minute city, this is the optimal possibility for living with the high quality societal urban life. When we have the possibility to access in a narrow perimeter of each one of these social functions, automatically, we will increase the indicators for my quality of life, my well-being, myself, my family, my friends, my sociability, myself with my neighbor, with my work colleagues, and with the planet, in a sustainable planet, a low carbon planet, and with an inclusive planet, an inclusive city. Sorry, I have.
Carlos, I'm sorry, Carlos. I'm afraid we're running out of time. So
Yes,
please,
yes.
can
Just
you
2
just
minutes.
finish because
yes.
we are 10 minutes to finish the event. Thank
Okay,
you. And we want to
I will finish in 2 minutes. Yes, this is the 6 urban social functions, and just for finishing, we wanted to develop not a village for my 15-minute city, for me. We wanted to develop the concept of polycentric city, the multipolar city. This is the capacity for accessing in the different point of city with all kind of services for each one of these functions. This is today the concept. We have been developing the digital platform for exploring these services in cities. And of course, we wanted to go beyond only transform the highway for cars today for people, but we wanted to develop not only the new infrastructures, we want to develop new services. To learn, this is the school, the capital of my district, to work in the proximity, to share and reuse, to develop the one-point shop, to engage the community with the citizen kiosk outdoor, to develop the health services in the proximity, and of course to transform the street, because we wanted to have the peaceful street, to have the street with free cars, and to transform by vegetalization, peaceful street, and discover the natural resources, water, and other. This is the concept of the city of 15 minutes of the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, because she wanted to develop in the next period this way for all Paris. Thank you, and sorry for.
Yes, thank you, Veronica. I know we are running out of time. There's not much time left. I will ask 3 questions to each of the speakers, just briefly, to have your final considerations on what you said. Carlos, thank you for your presentation. We hear a lot about the 15-minute cities, and I think people need it to understand from your own words, what does it mean making accessible neighborhoods. It seems they are accessible, but in fact services are not there, and it's not safe to reach them. And we especially saw this during COVID time. I didn't know how to reach my supermarket, which is just a kilometer from here, because I could not go out. Police would stop me. So maybe this is a new way of looking at accessibility in our environment. So starting from you, Carlos, the question is, because I see it also in the polls, there's a risk that people may move out of cities because, as Caroline said, they have a garden, they have a space. That's one thing. But we also see the need to focus on a transit-oriented development. So develop cities or a 15-minute city concept around stations in the territory. I see some inequalities there. Very briefly, I know this may take another 90 minutes to level, but how can we reduce or tackle the inequalities, core city center and rural area in this concept, in this type of approaches?
This is a very good. This is a very good question. In fact, we have been developing two different concepts. The first concept is the 50-minute city for the compact cities, for the high-density cities. And we have been developing the concept of the territory of 15 minutes for the rural areas, for the small villages, for the middle towns. The concept is the same concept, to reconquer time, to reconquer useful time, but in the rural areas, in the small towns, this is the not way for developing, for implementing, because in fact in the rural areas we don't have the mass transportation. It's not possible to go in bike in 15 minutes to have access for the essential functions. We have been developing the different concepts in order to fight the social inequalities and the economic inequalities. Because in the rural areas, we have two problems. The first problem is the poor people, because the economic inequalities are very important, and the social exclusion. The social exclusion is very, very important in the rural areas. We have been developing the new rural services for the territory of 60 minutes. But I have been developing for people interested in my website, in the ETI chair, the booklet, the notebook of territory in rurality for 30 minutes new services.
Okay, thank you for, yes?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah,
I
was
don't
muted.
care. It's okay now.
I thank you for your answer. I was muted, which happens all the time to any of us. So I think it's answering not just very well my question, but also some other people who posted this in the chat. Back to Mark, very quickly. What are some key health considerations that decision makers shall now introduce in their policies and in projects? Now learning from what we have just experienced. Key policy health considerations.
You know, that as what I mentioned, urban and transport planning has a large impact on health. And what we see, you know, air pollution is causing a lot of deaths and also disease. We see noise, but also at the same time, the lack of physical activity in the population is a concern. So we need to have much more physical activity, get people much more active. The other thing, I think, what has come to the forefront also from COVID is the mental health problem. And we've always seen this, but it's been made worse through the COVID, particularly when people were isolated. And, you know, for that, social cohesion, social capital is very important, but also issues like green space in cities. I would like to emphasize this is an important point. Our brains are used to green space from an evolutionary perspective, and often in cities we don't get enough, so it's something to introduce that as well.
Thank you very much. And Caroline, you're my last for the question. You're obviously working with cities, so it's just a quick tip for those who, like us, like many other networks, are working in the cities. Do you see any area where cities need to strengthen their capability, and how we can really learn from cooperating all together in strengthening these capacities?
I'll try to be concise, but at the same time, when we say strengthening capacity, I mean, what I want to say is, I think, you know, the two really clear areas, in addition to everything Carlos said, is walking and cycling and public transport. You know, these are the two areas where we need to prioritize investments. And I think, you know, we only have to look at cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen, and a lot of the cities that have taken quick action to reallocate road space in the last few months to show that it's possible and achievable. And so I think in terms of capacity, what we really need is a prioritization that these areas really get the investment. We know it's possible, we just need to do it. So anything that can support cities to actually make that happen, I think has got to be the most important thing.
And that's a very strong message. Thank you, Caroline. Veronica, thank you for showing us the question. It was a bit provocative. I asked the audience, what do we still miss to make the change happen? Obviously, to more sustainable mobility, to a new mobility paradigm. And a large majority seems to agree that political drive is necessary. We see this in many cities. We saw great examples where the mayor has taken political drive in leading and steering this change. Then we see citizens' engagement. That's a very important and interesting answer. I was hoping to see 100% of the audience saying citizens' engagement is fundamental. So we hope to be launching new initiatives very soon with citizens and have you all on board. And then cross-sectoral approach, fundamental, as all of the speakers have said today, working across academia and research, industry, entrepreneurs, but also citizens and local governments is essential to make things happen, to have the change happen, to ensure that the investments are actually done. So I'm really, really sad to say goodbye to all of you because I would love to continue another 30 minutes. The discussion was just starting, but I hope we can take this discussion offline, perhaps through the social media. So I would like to thank all the speakers, Mark, Caroline, and Carlos. Thank you very much for joining us today.